History often paints Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent as a great conqueror and lawmaker, a golden age ruler, and Sultan, his wife, is remembered as the ultimate power woman, a slave who rose to become an empress. Their story is told as one of the greatest romances in history. But what if I told you that beneath the surface of love letters, lavish jewels, and palace intrigue, there lies a much more complicated, and frankly, a much darker truth? Was it truly love that defined their relationship? Or was it a form of sophisticated control? Did Suleiman elevate Harem, or did he trap her in a gilded cage? Today, we're going to peel back the layers of legend and look at the unsettling reality of what it meant to be loved by the most powerful man in the world. This isn't just a love story. It's a story of survival, sacrifice, and the terrifying price of power. To understand their story, we have to start at the beginning. Before she was Hürrem Sultan, she was likely named Alexandra Lisovska, a young woman captured during a slave raid in what is now Ukraine. Ripped from her home, she was brought to the heart of the Ottoman Empire, Istanbul, and presented to the Topkapi Palace. Imagine the sheer terror and disorientation. She was just one of many, a nameless girl in a vast system designed to serve the Sultan. Her future was not her own. It was in this environment of complete powerlessness that she met Sultan Suleiman. The traditional story tells us he was immediately captivated by her intelligence, her spirit, and her fiery red hair. She was nicknamed Hurrem, meaning the cheerful one, for her ability to bring joy to the somber palace. Suleiman showered her with affection and poetry. He called her my love, my moonlight, my most sincere friend, my confidant. These are beautiful words, and they form the basis of their legendary romance. But let's pause and consider the context. Hurrem was a slave. Her very existence in the palace was dependent on the Sultan's favor. Every smile, every clever remark, was a performance for her survival. Her cheerfulness wasn't just a personality trait. It was a necessary tool. For a woman in the harem, the Sultan's attention was the only path to safety and influence. Without it, she could be forgotten, cast aside, or worse. So, when Suleiman chose her, was it a fairy tale moment of love at first sight? Or was it a calculated move by a desperate young woman who saw her one and only chance to escape oblivion? The first major shift in their relationship, and the first sign of Hurrem's incredible ambition, was when she convinced Suleiman to make her his legal wife. This was revolutionary. For centuries, Ottoman sultans did not officially marry their concubines, especially not foreign-born slaves. They had children with multiple women to ensure the dynasty's continuation. But marriage was reserved for political alliances with noble families. By marrying Hürrem Sultan, shattered tradition. On the surface, this looks like the ultimate act of love. He was defying centuries of custom for her. He freed her from slavery and made her his wife, his Haseki Sultan, a title created just for her. She was no longer just a favorite, she was the empress. But let's look at this from another angle. In freeing and marrying her, Suleiman also bound her to him in an unprecedented way. As a slave concubine, Hurrem theoretically had a degree of separation, but as his wife, her identity became completely intertwined with his. She was now a public figure, her status entirely dependent on her position as Suleiman's wife. He didn't just give her freedom, he redefined her existence. She was free from the technical status of a slave, but she was now imprisoned in a new role, one with immense pressure and scrutiny. Her life was no longer about personal survival in the harem. It was about maintaining her status as the Sultan's one true partner, a position that came with a whole new set of dangers. The most chilling aspect of their story involves what happened to Hurrem's rivals and even her own children. The Ottoman court was a snake pit of ambition. The law of fratricide, which allowed a new sultan to execute his brothers to prevent civil war, loomed over everyone. Every prince was a potential threat to the others. Hurrem knew that for her own sons to survive and one day take the throne, all other contenders had to be eliminated. Her first major rival was Mahidevran Sultan, the mother of Suleiman's firstborn son, Mustafa. Hurrem systematically worked to undermine Mahidevran's influence, eventually leading to her exile from the capital. But the real target was Mustafa. Prince Mustafa was by all accounts the ideal heir. He was popular with the army, the janissaries, and the people. He was seen as the future of the empire, and that made him the biggest threat to Hurrem's sons. Over the years, a campaign of whispers and rumors began, suggesting Mustafa was plotting to overthrow his own father. It's widely believed that Hurrem and her allies, including her son-in-law Rustam Pasha, orchestrated this campaign. They played on Suleiman's deepest fears of betrayal. Think about the psychological manipulation required. They had to convince a father that his beloved, capable son was a traitor. Eventually, Suleiman was convinced. In 1553, he summoned Mustafa to his tent during a military campaign. As Mustafa entered, he was ambushed and strangled to death on his father's orders. He died looking at the silent tent where his father sat, listening. Now, where was Suleiman in all of this? Was a weak-willed man manipulated by a cunning wife, or was he a willing participant? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle, and it's deeply disturbing. Suleiman was an absolute monarch. Nothing happened in his empire, let alone his own family, without his consent. He may have been influenced by Hurrem's whispers, but the final decision to kill his own son was his, and his alone. He chose Harem and her children over his firstborn. This wasn't just about love. It was a cold political calculation. By eliminating Mustafa, he secured the path for one of Hurrem's sons, consolidating power within one single branch of the family Hur branch. He sacrificed his most popular son to appease the woman who held a unique power over him. This act reveals a man who, while a brilliant statesman, was also capable of immense personal cruelty, driven by paranoia and, perhaps, a possessive love that demanded absolute loyalty, even at the cost of his own child. Hurrem's story doesn't end there. After Mustafa's death, the path was clear for her sons, but tragedy continued to follow. Her youngest son, Cihangir, who was said to have adored his half-brother Mustafa, died of grief shortly after the execution. Later, after both Suleiman and Hurrem had passed away, her two remaining sons, Salim and Bayezid, fought a bitter civil war for the throne. Bayezid eventually fled to Persia, where he was handed back to his brother Salim and executed, along with his own sons. So, in the end, all of Hurrem's scheming, all the blood spilled to protect her children, resulted in them turning on each other. Only one, Salim, survived to become Sultan, but he would be remembered as Salim the Sot. A far cry from his magnificent father. Was this the legacy Hurrem fought for? A family torn apart by the very power she had spent her life accumulating. Let's re-examine the central question. Did Suleiman save Hurrem, or did he trap her? He certainly saved her from the anonymity and powerlessness of being a common slave. He gave her a platform, wealth, and influence beyond the wildest dreams of any woman of her time. But he also created the conditions for her moral and spiritual downfall. To survive and thrive in the world he placed her in, she had to become ruthless. She had to orchestrate the downfall of rivals and even participate in the destruction of Suleiman's own family. He gave her a golden cage, and to secure that cage, she had to become its most fearsome guardian. Their love was real, in its own way. The letters and poems attest to a deep emotional connection, but it was a love forged in the crucible of absolute power, and it was warped by it. It was a possessive, paranoid, and ultimately destructive force. Suleiman's love didn't just elevate Hurrem, it demanded her complete transformation. She had to shed the person she was, Alexandra, and become Hurrem, the schemer, the survivor, the empress. He loved the woman she became for him, a woman forged in the fires of his court. So while history remembers them as a great love story, it's more accurate to see it as a profound tragedy. A story of two people who, in their quest for love and power, lost parts of their humanity along the way, leaving a legacy written not just in poetry, but in blood. What do you think? Was Hurrem a villain, a victim, or simply a brilliant player in a deadly game? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Have you ever heard of an empire so vast it spanned 3 continents? A place so powerful, its name was whispered with both fear and respect across the world. This was the Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent, a golden age of splendor, wealth, and absolute authority. Imagine a realm stretching from the heart of Europe, across the vast lands of Asia, and deep into the sun-drenched landscapes of Africa. This wasn't just an empire, it was the center of the world. From the bustling markets of Istanbul to the far-flung fortresses on its borders, the Ottoman Empire was a marvel of organization and military might. Its armies were legendary, its navy controlled the seas, and its treasury overflowed with gold and jewels. When Suleiman spoke, kings and emperors listened. His influence shaped the course of history, redrawing maps and building a legacy that would last for centuries. But with great power comes great pressure, and nowhere was this pressure more intense than within the walls of the Topkapi Palace. Life inside the palace was a world of its own, governed by ancient traditions and unwritten rules. It was a dazzling, yet dangerous place. Every corridor held a secret. Every whispered conversation could seal a person's fate. The palace wasn't just a home for the Sultan. It was the nerve center of the entire empire, a stage for a constant, high-stakes game of power. Here, ambition was a double-edged sword, and trust was a commodity rarer than the most precious gems. At the heart of this intricate world was the Harem, a place often misunderstood as just a collection of beautiful women. In reality, it was a complex social and political institution. The women of the harem, especially the Sultan's mother, the valid Sultan, and his favorite consorts, wielded immense influence. They were not just passive residents. They were players in the grand game of empire. They educated future princes, managed vast estates, and often advised the Sultan himself. Their rivalries and alliances could shake the very foundations of the dynasty. And what about love? In a world where every marriage was a political alliance, and every child a potential heir or rival, could true love even exist? For the Sultan, personal feelings were a luxury he could rarely afford. Every decision, from choosing a consort to appointing a governor, was measured in terms of power and stability. A smile could be a political statement, and a gift could be a strategic move. Love, if it blossomed, had to survive in the shadow of duty and the constant threat of rebellion. The law of the land was absolute, but the fear of betrayal was even stronger. Princes, who were brothers, were also potential rivals for the throne. To prevent civil war, a brutal tradition often meant that once a new sultan ascended, his brothers could be executed. Imagine living with that reality, where the people you grew up with could become your deadliest enemies. This system, known as fratricide, was seen as a necessary evil to preserve the unity and strength of the empire. It was a stark reminder that for the Ottomans, the survival of the state was more important than anything, even family. Suleiman the Magnificent's reign was a spectacle of unparalleled grandeur and ruthless politics. It was a time of great art and architecture, of brilliant laws and military victories. But beneath the shimmering surface of this golden age lay a world of strict rules, hidden dangers, and heartbreaking choices. Have you ever heard of a sultan who wrote poetry with one hand and signed execution orders with the other? This is the story of Suleiman, a man of profound contradictions. In the grand halls of Europe, they whispered his name with awe, calling him the Magnificent. But back in the heart of the Ottoman Empire, his people knew him by a different title, Kanuni, the lawgiver. This wasn't just a nickname. It was the very essence of his being. Suleiman wasn't your typical conquering hero. Yes, his armies stretched the empire's borders further than ever before, striking fear into the hearts of his rivals. But when the dust of battle settled, he would retreat into his chambers, not to count his treasures, but to pen verses filled with longing and philosophical depth. He was a man who appreciated the finest art, the most intricate architecture, and the most profound ideas. He saw beauty in the world, yet his greatest passion was for something far more abstract. Order. This obsession with order was the bedrock of his reign. He believed that the empire, this vast and sprawling entity, was like a perfectly crafted clock. Every single piece, from the Grand Vizier down to the humblest farmer, had a specific role to play. If any piece malfunctioned, if any gear slipped out of place, the entire machine was at risk. And for Suleiman, there was no greater sin than threatening this delicate balance. Justice had to be absolute, and the law was supreme, standing above even the ties of blood. This rigid belief system would cast a long, inescapable shadow over his personal life. He had sons, potential heirs to his throne, and he had brothers, men who shared his lineage. But in Suleiman's eyes, even they were not exempt from the law. If their ambition or their actions were perceived as a threat to the stability of the empire, they would face the consequences. No family connection, no shared memory, could shield them from the cold, hard logic of his rule. It was a brutal, yet in his mind, necessary calculus for maintaining power. And then, into this world of unbending rules and imperial duty, walked a woman who would change everything. Sultan. She was not of noble birth, a captive brought to the harem, yet she possessed an intelligence and a will that captivated the most powerful man in the world. Their love story is legendary, a romance that defied 1,000 years of tradition. Suleiman broke protocol for her, making her his legal wife and elevating her to a position of unprecedented influence. He wrote her poems filled with a passion that seemed to contradict his stern public persona. For a time, it might have seemed like love could conquer all, even the Sultan's rigid principles. But the palace was a viper's nest of intrigue. Every whisper in the hallway, every secret meeting, was a potential plot. Hurrem, now a mother to the Sultan's sons, found herself at the center of this dangerous game. She had to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics, not just for her own survival, but for the future of her children. This is where the two sides of Suleiman the lover and the lawgiver would collide in the most tragic way imaginable. The love he felt for Hurrem was real, a fiery passion that... Have you ever pictured the Ottoman harem as a lavish paradise filled with beautiful women living in luxury? Well, the reality was far more complex and often much darker. Forget the romanticized images you've seen in movies. The harem was, for most of its residents, a gilded cave, a world of intrigue, rivalry, and survival. Let's pull back the curtain and discover the truth about life inside the Sultan's palace. The word haram itself means forbidden or private in Arabic, and that is exactly what it was, a secluded part of the palace where the Sultan's female relatives and concubines lived. But how did these women get there? Contrary to popular belief, they weren't just a collection of beauties from across the empire. The vast majority entered the harem as slaves, captured in war or purchased from slave markets. They came from diverse backgrounds: Georgians, Russians, and Europeans, often taken from their homes at a very young age, losing their names, their families, and their freedom forever. Once inside the Topkapi Palace, a girl's old life was over. She was given a new name and began a rigorous education. This wasn't about reading philosophy or science. It was a highly specialized training program designed to create the perfect companion for the Sultan. They learned Turkish, the Quran, and the intricate rules of palace etiquette. They were taught to sing, dance, play musical instruments, and master the art of conversation. Essentially, their entire existence was reshaped to please one man, the Sultan. Their every move, every word, was calculated to attract his favor. The harem was a strict hierarchy, almost like a military organization, but with the Sultan's mother, the valid Sultan, as the commander-in-chief. She was the most powerful woman in the empire, ruling the harem with an iron fist. Below her were the Sultan's favorites, the Cadans, who had borne him children. Then came the Ikbils, the favored concubines, and at the very bottom were the newcomers, the odalisks, or Karis, who were essentially servants in training. Moving up this ladder was the ultimate goal, and the competition was fierce. A woman's status depended entirely on catching the Sultan's eye. If she was chosen to spend the night with him, she had a chance to rise. If she bore him a son, her status would skyrocket, granting her power, wealth, and her own apartments and servants. This turned the harem into a hotbed of jealousy and conspiracy. Women would spy on each other, spread rumors, and sometimes even resort to poisoning their rivals. It was a dangerous game where the stakes were incredibly high. Love, as we understand it, was a rare luxury. For these women, the primary goal was not romance. It was survival and securing a future for themselves and their children. Life was governed by an endless list of rules. The harem was guarded by black eunuchs, who were the only men, besides the Sultan, allowed inside. The women's movements were severely restricted. They rarely left the palace walls, and when they did, they were completely covered and heavily guarded. Their world was small, confined to the courtyards, baths, and opulent rooms of the harem. While they were surrounded by luxury fine silks, jewels, and exquisite food, they had no personal freedom. Their lives were not their own. They belonged to the Sultan. So, the next time you hear about the Ottoman harem, remember the real story. It wasn't just a fantasy of pleasure and indulgence. It was a complex, self-contained world where thousands of women lived out their lives in captivity, navigating a treacherous path of ambition, rivalry, and hope, all under the absolute power of the Sultan. It was a world of beauty and brutality, of power and powerlessness, a gilded cage whose golden bars were all too. Before she was the magnificent Hürrem Sultan, a woman who would rewrite the rules of an empire, she was just a girl, not a princess, not a noble, but someone much like you or me, a girl with a name, a family, and a home. Let's journey back in time, far from the glittering Topkapi Palace, to a world that history often forgets. Her story likely begins in the early 1500s, in a region we now know as Western Ukraine, then part of the Kingdom of Poland. Imagine a small town, surrounded by lush forests and rolling fields. Here, a girl named Alexandra, or perhaps Anastasia Lisovska, was born. Her father was an Orthodox priest, a respected figure in their tight-knit community. She would have grown up with the scent of incense from her father's church, the sounds of Slavic hymns, and the taste of hearty Eastern European food. Her world was one of simple routines and deep-rooted traditions. She spoke a native Ruthenian language, shared stories with her friends, and probably dreamed of a future much like her mother's, a life of family, faith, and community. She was free. Her days were her own, filled with the small joys and sorrows of a normal life. She had no idea that her destiny was tied to one of the most powerful empires the world had ever known. She was just a girl, living her life, completely unaware of the cataclysmic change that was thundering toward her. This idyllic life was shattered in an instant. During the 1520s, Crimean Tota raiding parties swept through the region. These were brutal, terrifying incursions. They came on horseback, fast and merciless, burning villages and taking captives. In one of these raids, Alexandra's world was torn apart. She was captured. We can only imagine the terror and confusion of that moment. Ripped away from her family, her home, everything she had ever known. She, along with thousands of others, was forced into a long, grueling march south. This journey was a crucible of despair. From a free person, she was now property, a commodity to be bought and sold. The destination was Kaffa, a major slave port on the Crimean Peninsula. This city was the largest slave market in the Eastern world, a place of immense human suffering. Here, her old identity was stripped away. Her name, her past, her freedom all gone. She was inspected, priced, and sold. It was here that she was likely purchased by agents of the Ottoman Empire, selected for her striking features, her fiery red hair, and perhaps a spark of defiance in her eyes that even her captors couldn't extinguish. From Kaffa, she was put on a ship and sailed across the Black Sea, heading for the heart of power, Istanbul, or as it was then known, Constantinople. As the magnificent skyline of the imperial city came into view, with its towering minarets and grand domes, what must she have thought? Was it a symbol of her eternal prison, or did a tiny part of her see something else? A new world, a new stage, and perhaps a new beginning. Upon arrival, she was taken to the Imperial Harem at Topkapi Palace. This wasn't just a place of luxury. It was a highly structured, competitive institution. Here, she was given a new name, Hurrem, which means the cheerful one or the laughing one in Persian. It was a name that hinted at the charismatic, joyful personality that would soon captivate the most powerful man in the world. Her education began immediately. She learned Turkish, the principles of Islam, court etiquette, poetry, music, and dance. She was being molded from a slave girl into a concubine fit for a sultan. But Hurrem was more than just a pretty face. She was intelligent, ambitious, and a quick learner. She understood that in the ruthless world of the harem, knowledge was power. She observed everything, learned from everyone, and began to navigate the complex social hierarchy. She wasn't just surviving, she was preparing. The girl from a small town in Eastern Europe was on the verge of meeting Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. That meeting would not only change her life, but it would also change the course of the Ottoman Empire forever. Her journey from Alexandra to Hurrem was complete. Her next chapter, the one that would make her a legend, was about to begin. Thanks for watching. If you want to know what happened next, and how Hurrem rose to unprecedented power, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you 10.